Hello and welcome to the Franz van Kat interview. I'm Annette Young. One of the most iconic images to emerge from the Arab Spring was that of women taking to the streets and loudly protesting for change. But with the rise of Islamist parties in the Arab world, will they be relegated once more to the sidelines of public life? My guest today is Dr. Margot Badran, who's a historian and specialist in women's studies, focusing on the Islamic world. She's also the author of a book called Feminism in Islam, which was published some 2 years ago. Dr. Margot Badran, thank you so much for being with us.
I'm happy to be here.
Let me start by asking you about the Arab Spring and the opportunity that it possibly presents for improving women's rights. Is this a one-in-a-millennium chance for that to occur?
Well, I think it's a very important chance, but if we look historically, women have been prominent in earlier revolutions. So in these kinds of changes, women do come to the forefront. However, this particular set of revolutions, if you will, I think offers unprecedented promise for women, partly because there have been certain gains in the past and also certain unfinished business. And there is a surge or a resurgence of energy that revolution unleashes.
And certainly the social media helped enormously in getting people to basically engage in this protest movement, and women were very much at the forefront of that, weren't they?
Women were at the forefront. Social media played a significant role in, as you say, getting huge numbers of people mobilized, but of course they were already primed, as it were. And if, for example, in Egypt, in the last several years, there were various demonstrations for rights and freedoms and against the various aspects of tyrannical government that were put down because they weren't large enough and they could be easily suppressed. And so the vast outreach that the media offered, the social media offered, and the enabled these movements to be successful and not to be repressed because they were too vast and huge. So that is correct.
And there's also been a long history of feminism in Egypt by comparison to other countries in the region.
In Egypt, feminism really emerged as a way of thinking in the late 19th century. And during the colonial, anti-colonial movement, 1919-1922 period against British rule, women came out in the streets in protests. Different classes, the upper classes were somehow organized and they were more segregated in their public protests, and women of the popular classes came out with the men, very much like today when there was a mixture of men and women together surging. And in the aftermath of this revolution, the first feminist organization was created. And what I've observed is after revolution, the chances for women to organize and to mobilize have emerged. Now, in some places, such as Algeria, this did not happen, but in Egypt, because there had been a prior history of social activism, women were able to.
So what is different about this particular uprising in terms of women's rights?
Well, this particular uprising is so massively, has so massively mobilized virtually the whole population. And it was very much a youth driven movement, but people of different generations also were part of it, but the youth really, in a way, kick-started it. And of course, they were very savvy with the media and so on. And also, because the earlier movement, especially the segregated women's demonstrations, were people of older generation. Also, it is very much a cross-class movement, very much, in a way, popular movement, but also women and men of different classes. There was much more togetherness, if you will, and also across a spectrum. I mean, you had religiously oriented people, you had Islamists, you had secularists coming together in
And
the
that
square.
was one of the striking images that emerged in January and February, was the sort of, seeing those photos and news, shots of women with veils taking part very loudly and participating very openly in these street protests, along with their secular peers.
Right, and that was very striking, very evident, and it was a fantastic sort of tableau of the country. And so many of us think when we see somebody with a hijab or a veil that they are conservative, that they don't have a sense of their rights, that they're dominated, or so on. And I think the images, the iconography that came out of these movements showed that these women are very vibrant and concerned about national and their own rights.
But is there not a danger of a backlash rather, now emerging so far in the Egyptian elections? I think only one woman to this point has been voted into parliament. I mean,
I personally am not. There has been, it is typical that after these revolutions that women who have participated are somehow edged out a bit. But it's also typical in Egypt that they refuse to go back. And I think that there was already trouble in March 8th when the demonstrations turned a little bit nasty for Women's Day. Women are not, have not been prominent in running for elections or being elected, but I think that is an inheritance of what has been in the past. So I don't think that it's a backlash of the revolution, or it's more or less that it's business somehow as usual.
But so what has to happen in order for that to change? Because, and is it not the case, and I'd be interested, given the title of your previous book, that feminism and Islam is a sort of oxymoron, and when you've got more and more Islamist parties rising to power in that part of the world, is there not, is it the case that women won't be voted in because it's not part of their game plan as such?
Right. Well, I think that it is complicated. And first of all, I mean, feminism and Islam, or Islamic feminism, if you will, is not an oxymoron, because feminism is about equal rights for all human beings, irregardless of sex or gender, and opportunities, and for social justice. And this, you can read gender equality and social justice ideas from the Quran or from secular instruments. So Islamic feminism is just referencing the religious texts. And in fact, these different readings are used in tandem, even by Islamists, because they live in Egypt, for example. They're governed by the constitution, and they are citizens, and so they have to wield different kinds of discourses. I think that women have more, excuse me, more tools today than they've had before, because if people want to advance very retrogressive readings of the Quran, I mean, they can come out with other readings. Now, generally speaking, the population is fairly conservative, including the seculars. What have they done? I mean, what did they do all these years for women? Not so much.
But you have a situation now where the Muslim Brotherhood is leading, and also you have the hardline Al-Noor bloc, which grabbed nearly a quarter of the vote for the ultra-conservative Salafis, who seek to impose strict Islamic observance in Egypt.
The Salafis are a big problem, but what they are causing difficulties, if you will, for the Muslim Brothers. There's a lot of animosity between them, and this can work in the favor of the rest of the population.
And how can it work in the favor of women?
Well, because the Muslim Brothers are, for example, they've come out for a secular state. They are very pragmatic, practical people.
And they keep referring to Turkey as their role model.
And although we, of course, have to keep an eye on everybody, whatever they're secular or Islamist. But they're very practical and pragmatic. Women are very important in the party, and some of them have come out and spoken about rights. And I think it's up to all of people who have records and experience of fighting for human rights and women's rights to make some kind of good connections and and work together with the Islamists, particularly the ones that are more liberal.
What are the odds of that happening?
I would like to think that it can happen. I'm not sure it will happen, but also there's a difference between the older generations and the younger generations. The younger generations, and now youth goes up to about 40 in our conversations about it, right, and the activists and so on. I think the youth are less rigid in their distinctions between the religious and the secular.
So it's not going to happen overnight. It's a generational change that's required.
I think that it will happen the first 4 years. The first, duration of the parliament, the first parliament, it will be difficult. On the other hand, these folks, these more conservatives, whether they're secular or Islamic, are not going to have a totally easy ride either. And I'm not sure it's going to break down completely on Islamist secular grounds. And I think if it doesn't, women have a better chance of pushing forward. That is, the more progressive elements, whether they're more religiously or secularly oriented.
Dr. Badran, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, and as it turned out, we didn't have a chance to talk about other countries in the region, but I want to thank you very much for coming in today. And that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up very shortly.